Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into something that sounds romantic on the surface, but very quickly reveals sharp edges once you're actually inside it. If you're enjoying these late-night history journeys, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely helps you unwind. And before we really begin, drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from and what the local time is for you right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all scattered across the dark, listening together. You're standing in Rome, not the postcard Rome of marble ruins and dramatic sunsets, but a living, breathing city. The air smells faintly of smoke, oil and damp stone. Somewhere nearby, sandals scuff against packed earth. A vendor shouts. You adjust your tunic, already aware that romance here doesn't begin with a swipe or a spark. It begins with timing, status, and your family's plans. And here's the cheeky reality check right up front. You probably wouldn't survive this dating scene with your modern expectations intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're younger than you think you should be. That's the first surprise. In Roman society, dating as a casual exploratory phase doesn't really exist. Instead, life moves on a fast track designed by elders. If you're a girl born into a respectable Roman family, your path is already sketched out before you understand what love even is. Historical records suggest many Roman girls married between 12 and 14. Some were younger. You might still be playing with childhood trinkets while adults discuss your future husband in low, practical tones. If you're a boy, things move slower, but not by much. You're expected to mature into responsibility, to learn public life, rhetoric, and household management. Romance, if it happens early, is not meant to distract you. Love is a side effect, not the goal. Marriage is about alliances, lineage, and property. Feelings are negotiable. You walk through your family home, the atrium echoing softly. This is where your parents entertain guests, where business deals are made, where your future is quietly discussed. You overhear names, families, reputations. One mainstream historical fact is unavoidable here. Roman marriages among the elite were arranged primarily to strengthen social and political ties. Love might grow later, like moss on stone, but no one is waiting for it to bloom first. And yet, despite all this structure, your heart doesn't ask permission. You notice people. A boy from another household who avoids your eyes a little too carefully. A girl who laughs once, quickly, then looks away because she knows someone is watching. These moments are small, fleeting, and often unspoken, but they matter to you, even if society pretends they don't. There's a quirky detail historians love to mention. Roman children sometimes wore amulets called bullae, little charms meant to protect them from harm and bad influences. When a boy came of age, he removed his bulla in a formal ceremony. Symbolically, childhood ended. In a way, so did innocence. From that point on, you're fair game for adult expectations, including marriage politics. It's oddly ceremonial for something that feels so personal. You begin to realize that attraction in Rome is something you feel quietly. You don't announce it, you don't chase it openly. Reputation is fragile here, especially for girls. A single rumor can cling to you longer than any perfume. Historians still argue whether young Romans experienced romance in the same emotional way we do, or if later writers projected idealized feelings backward. Standing here, though, it feels very real to you, confusing, exciting, and slightly terrifying. Daily life keeps moving. You pass through streets lined with shops. You hear laughter from a nearby courtyard. Somewhere, a wedding procession drifts by. Music, bright garments, a girl being escorted from one household to another. You watch her face carefully. Is she excited, nervous, numb? Roman art tends to show these scenes as orderly and dignified, but reality was probably messier. Humans tend to stay human, no matter the century. If you're from a lower-class family, things look different but not necessarily freer. Marriage still comes early, driven by survival and practicality. Two households merging labour, resources and protection. Romance might exist, but it has to squeeze itself into the margins of work and fatigue. There's no long courtship period where you figure yourself out. You're figuring things out while doing them. And here's a light joke before we drift too deep. Imagine explaining to a Roman parent that you're just not ready for commitment right now. They would stare at you like you'd announced plans to marry a dolphin. Commitment isn't a phase, it's the default. Despite the rules, despite the structures, small rebellions exist. A glance held a second too long, a note passed through a servant, a whispered comment during a festival. These are dangerous, delicious moments. They're not dating in the modern sense, but they're emotional testing grounds. You learn what it feels like to want something you're not supposed to control. You begin to sense the core tension that defines Roman romance. Personal feeling versus public duty. Your life is not entirely your own. Even your heart feels partially supervised. Yet it still beats, still reacts, still hopes. That contradiction follows you everywhere, like footsteps echoing behind you. As night settles over the city, oil lamps flicker to life. You lie down, listening to distant sounds. Voices, footsteps, the faint clatter of a closing shop. Somewhere out there, someone your age is wondering the same things you are. Who will I belong to? Will I be happy? Do those two things even overlap? And as sleep starts to pull at you, you realize this is only the beginning. Because in Rome, first crushes aren't cute memories. They're the quiet prelude to lifelong consequences. You don't really wake up to the idea of marriage in Rome. It's already standing at the foot of your bed, arms crossed, tapping its sandal impatiently. Remember those first crushes, those half-hidden glances you were barely allowed to notice. They don't get consulted now. This is the phase where love is politely told to wait outside, if it's allowed in at all. You move through your days knowing something is approaching. Conversations stop when you enter the room. Adults smile at you with a new kind of appraisal, the way someone looks at land they're thinking of buying. Marriage here isn't framed as a romantic milestone. It's a duty, a transaction, a stabilizing mechanism for society, and you, somehow, are both the subject and the object. One mainstream historical fact sits heavy on your shoulders. Roman marriages, especially among citizens, were legal agreements between families, not emotional unions between individuals. Your consent might be asked, but it's more ceremonial than decisive. If you say no, the room doesn't explode into arguments. It just waits. Pressure is patient. Pressure always wins. If you're a girl, the timeline accelerates sharply. Puberty is treated less like a personal milestone and more like a scheduling alert. You are now eligible. That's the word. Eligible. It doesn't sound romantic, and it isn't meant to. Your mother adjusts your clothing more carefully now. Your posture is corrected. You're reminded to speak less, smile softly, and above all, not draw attention to yourself. Love is not something you seek. It's something that might arrive later, like an unexpected guest who may or may not behave. If you're a man, you're told marriage will steady you, that it will anchor your impulses, sharpen your ambition. You're encouraged to think of a wife as part companion, part household manager, part symbol of your maturity. Emotional compatibility is nice, but reliability is better. Someone who can run a home without embarrassment, that's the real prize. You attend dinners where potential futures sit across from you, quietly eating olives. You're not supposed to stare, you're not supposed to flirt. You exchange almost nothing, yet everything is being assessed. Your family's reputation, their property, their connections. Historians still argue whether young Romans internalized these expectations fully or quietly resented them. But standing here, you feel the weight regardless. There's an odd calm to the process. No dramatic proposals, no kneeling, no swelling music. Instead, agreements are reached elsewhere, in conversations you're not invited to. When it's decided, you're informed. Congratulations. This is your life now. A quirky but revealing detail. Roman law allowed for marriage without the bride or groom even being present, as long as legal consent was established. Imagine finding out you're engaged because someone else shook hands about it. Romantic comedies would be very short here, about 12 seconds. Roll credits. And yet, humans are remarkably good at hoping. Even now you catch yourself wondering, maybe this person will be kind, maybe affection will grow. Roman writers often reassured themselves that love could develop after marriage, like a well-tended garden planted in practical soil. Whether that was comfort or propaganda is still debated. The wedding itself, when it comes, feels both festive and unsettling. You wear traditional colours. There are jokes, songs and symbolic gestures. Nuts are thrown. Words are spoken. Laughter fills the air. To an outsider, it looks joyful. To you, it feels like stepping onto a path that suddenly narrows, fences rising on both sides. Here's your second light joke, because we need one to survive this. Imagine telling your Roman relatives you'd like to date for a few years first and see how it goes. They would assume you were possessed and fetch a priest immediately. Once married, expectations click into place fast. If you're a wife, fidelity is mandatory, visible and enforced socially. Your virtue reflects directly on your husband's honour. If you're a husband, fidelity is encouraged, in theory. In practice, standards bend. The double standard is not subtle. It's carved into stone tablets and social attitudes alike. Love, when it exists, becomes quieter. It shows up in shared routines, small kindnesses, mutual respect. It's not the sweeping dramatic force modern stories sell you. It's more like learning how someone takes their bread, or noticing they sleep better when the lamp is left burning low. There's a fringe historical tidbit that always raises eyebrows. Some Roman thinkers believed too much passion weakened moral character. Love, intense love, was considered destabilizing. The ideal marriage, according to certain philosophers, was calm, orderly, and emotionally moderate, which is a very Roman way of saying, please don't make things complicated. Still, complications happen. You notice how your spouse laughs. You feel a tug of genuine fondness. Or maybe you don't. Maybe the house feels colder than you expected. Roman society doesn't offer much sympathy either way. Marriage is not about personal fulfillment, it's about continuity. As night falls, you lie beside someone who is technically your partner, legally your future, emotionally still a stranger. You listen to the sounds of the household settling. Somewhere in the city, others are doing the same, repeating this ritual thousands of times across generations. You remember those early crushes again, the glances, the almosts. They feel distant now, like dreams you once had but can't fully recall. And yet, something inside you stays awake, because even in a system built on duty, the human heart keeps testing the rules, gently, stubbornly, over and over again. And that tension between obligation and longing doesn't fade after the wedding. It just learns how to whisper instead of shout. The romance, if you can call it that, now lives on papyrus and wax tablets. You feel it the moment numbers enter the room. Remember how marriage arrived quietly and decisively? This is where it sharpens its edges. Love steps aside as contracts take centre stage, and you realise that in Rome relationships are not just felt, they're calculated. You sit near the edge of a conversation you're not meant to lead. The dowry is being discussed, not in whispers either. Calm voices, practical tones, land, coin, jewellery, household goods. This isn't insulting here, it's normal. One mainstream historical fact is unavoidable. A Roman dowry was expected in most marriages, and served as financial security for the husband, while still legally remaining tied to the wife's family. It's meant to stabilise the union, not romanticise it. Still, it's strange hearing your worth reduced to inventory. You're not offended so much as detached, as if they're discussing someone else entirely. The dowry isn't a gift, it's leverage. If the marriage fails under certain conditions, the dowry can be reclaimed. Love may be uncertain, but money likes rules. If you're the bride, you're told this is protection. And in a way it is. Your dowry gives you a thin layer of power in a system that offers very little. It means your husband has something to lose if he mistreats you too openly. That's the comfort Rome provides, thin but real. If you're the groom, you're taught to see the dowry as proof of seriousness. A family that invests in you believes you're stable, respectable, worthy. Romance doesn't impress Roman elders. Assets do. Here's a quietly absurd detail that historians still smile at. Dowries were sometimes so specific they listed individual items: beds, cloaks, silver cups. Imagine your love story summarized as one modest vineyard and 3 decent spoons. Somehow, that's binding. The legal language around marriage feels colder the closer you look. There are terms for fault, for abandonment, for repayment. Romans were intensely practical people. They prepared for failure even while celebrating unity. Historians still argue whether this realism made marriages stronger or simply more transactional. But standing here, you feel both interpretations pressing in at once. There's a third light joke drifting in, because otherwise this gets heavy fast. If modern dating contracts existed like this, half the population would be negotiating dishwasher rights on the first date. Despite the paperwork, daily life continues. You wake, you eat, you share space. And slowly, quietly, emotions do what they do best. Ignore logic. You start to notice habits. A routine emerges. The contract fades into the background, not because it's unimportant, but because feelings are terrible at respecting fine print. But Rome never forgets the fine print. Friends remind you of obligations, family checks in, reputation hovers like a shadow that never quite leaves. You're not just married to a person, you're married to expectations. A quirky fringe belief surfaces in medical texts of the time. Some Romans believed emotional imbalance could physically disrupt the body's humours. Too much passion, dangerous. Too much sadness, equally risky. Moderation was the goal. Love, ideally, should not cause sweating, insomnia, or excessive poetry. Already, you're failing at that last one. Divorce exists here, and it's easier than you expect. No courts, no drawn-out battles, a declaration, a return of the dowry under agreed conditions, and the marriage dissolves. Cold, efficient, the system is designed to move on quickly. Emotional closure is your problem. That knowledge sits quietly in your mind. This bond, so formal, so structured, can end almost as cleanly as it began. That doesn't make it meaningless, but it does make it fragile in a very Roman way. As evening settles again, you pass the household accounts. Numbers line up neatly. Outside, voices echo down the street. Life continues, indifferent to whether love thrives or withers. You understand something now. Roman dating doesn't fail because people lacked emotion. It succeeds, on its own terms, because emotion was never trusted to run the show. Contracts step in where hearts are unreliable, and yet, as you lie back and let the lamplight dim, you feel it again. That quiet rebellion, the sense that no contract, no dowry, no legal phrasing can fully contain what people feel when they sit too close, laugh too freely, or reach for each other in the dark. The paperwork may define your marriage, but it never quite manages to define you. You step back into the city, because if romance isn't happening privately, it's happening publicly, or at least semi-publicly, where everyone pretends not to notice. Remember those contracts and dowries? They don't kill attraction, they just force it to get creative. This is where flirting lives now, not in candlelit corners, but in crowded spaces where coincidence can be plausibly denied. You walk through the forum first. It's loud, dusty, alive. Merchants argue, lawyers posture, politicians practice their serious faces. And among all this, you feel it, that subtle awareness that eyes are on you, or that your own eyes linger longer than necessary. One mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. The Roman Forum wasn't just a political centre, it was a social stage. People went there to see and be seen. Reputation could be built here. So could attraction. Flirting, Roman style, is careful. You don't lean in too close. You don't touch. You let proximity do the work. You stand where someone might notice. You walk a familiar route at a familiar time. If you exchange words, they're safe ones. Comments about weather, business, or a public spectacle. Meaning, lives between the lines. Then there are the baths. And yes, this is where things get interesting. You enter the bath complex and the noise changes. Echoing voices, splashing water, steam curling into the air. The baths are one of the few places where social boundaries soften. Men and women usually bathe separately or at different times, but the atmosphere is still charged. Everyone is more relaxed, more exposed, less armoured by daily roles. Here's the fact everyone remembers. Roman baths were central to daily life, serving as places for hygiene, exercise, gossip and socializing. But here's the part you feel instead of read. This is where bodies exist without context. Status blurs. Confidence shows. Awkwardness is impossible to hide. A quirky historical tidbit slips in through the steam. Romans didn't have soap like we do. They used oil and a curved tool called a strigil to scrape dirt from their skin. It's intimate in a strangely mechanical way. Imagine trying to flirt while someone nearby is aggressively scraping themselves like a human cheese grater. Romance survives anyway. Somehow. You sit on a stone bench pretending to be deeply interested in absolutely nothing. Someone nearby laughs. It's easy. Unforced. That alone feels flirtatious. In Rome, ease is attractive. Control is attractive. Not trying too hard is the entire game. Graffiti helps where voices can't. You notice inscriptions carved into walls near popular walkways. Short poems, names paired together, bold declarations of desire. Some are crude, some are tender, some are clearly written by someone who had one glass of wine too many. These aren't just jokes. They're evidence. Romans flirted anonymously, publicly and permanently all at once. Historians still argue whether these messages were sincere expressions of affection or performative humour meant to entertain passers-by. Standing here, you suspect it's both. Humans rarely pick just one motive. You exchange glances again. This time it lingers. Just a heartbeat longer. Enough to be felt, not enough to be accused. That's Roman flirting in its purest form, an emotional nudge that leaves no fingerprints. Here's your first light joke for this section. Imagine a dating app where the main feature is accidentally walking past each other every day at the same hour. Rome perfected that algorithm centuries ago. Public games and festivals add another layer. You attend a spectacle, chariot races, theatrical performances, religious celebrations. The crowd presses close. Cheers erupt. It's loud enough that leaning in feels natural. Words are exchanged quickly, breath close to ear. It's still technically public. It's also unmistakably intimate. For respectable women, the rules are tighter. You're allowed to be present, but not expressive. Interest must be deniable. Too much enthusiasm risks gossip. And gossip is dangerous. A single comment, overheard and repeated, can reshape your reputation permanently. You learn to flirt with restraint, with posture, with timing. Men have more freedom, of course. That double standard again, tapping you on the shoulder like an unwanted reminder. A man's interest is ambition. A woman's interest is suspicion. Rome doesn't apologize for this. It doesn't even notice. Another fringe belief floats through Roman culture: physiognomy, the idea that character could be read on the face and body, a certain tilt of the head, a particular gaze. Attraction sometimes masquerades as scientific observation. You tell yourself you're not staring, you're assessing temperament. Very scholarly, extremely convincing. Second joke, because we need it. Congratulations, you've invented staring politely. As evening approaches, torches flicker on. The streets soften. The day's sharp edges blur. You walk home aware that nothing officially happened. And yet, something did. A thread has been spun. Delicate, nearly invisible, but real. You feel it follow you. That low hum of anticipation. It's not love yet. It's not even promise. It's possibility. And in Rome, possibility is risky enough to feel thrilling. Flirting here never guarantees outcome. It rarely leads directly to marriage. Sometimes it leads nowhere at all. But it feeds the emotional life that contracts ignore. It's where people practice wanting without committing, where they test reactions safely, or as safely as Rome allows. As you settle in for the night, you replay moments. A smile, a glance, a shared laugh drowned briefly by crowd noise. You don't know what it means yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. And that uncertainty, that gentle, buzzing not knowing, is the closest thing Rome offers to dating, as you understand it. Not private dinners, not labels, just shared space, shared air, and the hope that tomorrow you'll cross paths again. Words become your safest weapon now. Remember the glances in the forum, the careful nearness in the baths. This is where those feelings try to turn into something more durable. In Rome, seduction often happens quietly, through language. Carefully chosen, delicately delivered, and always deniable if necessary. You sit with a stylus in hand, hovering over a wax tablet. Writing feels intimate in a way speaking never quite does. Spoken words disappear into air, written ones linger. One mainstream historical fact anchors you here. Romans, especially the educated classes, valued letter writing deeply. Letters carried emotion, persuasion, apology, and desire across distance and social barriers. A well-phrased note could do what public flirting never could. You keep it light. You have to. Too direct would be dangerous. You comment on a shared moment, a joke overheard at a festival, a line of poetry that happened to come to mind. You don't say, "I want you." You say something like, "I was reminded of you today." Rome understands implication. Poetry steps in where plain speech falters. You've heard verses recited at dinners, at gatherings, sometimes even scribbled on walls. Love poetry circulates like a quiet undercurrent beneath respectable society. Catullus writes of obsession and longing. Ovid offers playful, strategic advice. Their words give shape to feelings you don't yet have permission to express openly. Here's the slightly mischievous historical truth. Ovid's Art of Love was essentially a Roman dating manual. Where to meet people, how to keep their interest, when to withdraw slightly to increase desire. It's clever, ironic, and not at all subtle. The fact that it was wildly popular tells you something important. Romans were deeply interested in romance, even while pretending it didn't matter. Historians still argue whether works like Ovid's reflected everyday behaviour or exaggerated it for entertainment. But sitting here, rehearsing your phrasing, you suspect people took more notes than they admitted. Gifts follow words, small ones, thoughtful ones, a piece of fruit, a ribbon, a book of poems. Nothing extravagant. Extravagance invites questions. The goal isn't to impress witnesses, it's to signal attention. You learn quickly that noticing details is the most seductive skill available to you. There's a quirky fringe belief woven into this world of words. Some Romans thought handwriting itself revealed character. A steady hand suggested moral steadiness. Slanted letters hinted at passion. So yes, even your penmanship might be flirting for you. No pressure. Here's your first light joke for this stretch of the night. Imagine judging a crush not by their texts, but by how aggressively they carve letters into wax. Romantic, slightly terrifying. Reputation still hovers close. Letters are often delivered through servants, and servants talk. You choose your words, knowing they may pass through more hands than you'd like. That constraint makes everything sharper. Every sentence has to work twice. Once for the intended reader, once for anyone who might glimpse it accidentally. When a reply comes, your body reacts before your mind does. A quickened pulse, a small smile you have to hide. The message is brief, polite, and somehow loaded with meaning. It mirrors your tone. That alone feels like progress. In Rome, matching energy is practically a love language. Poetry is sometimes recited aloud too, at gatherings where emotion can be masked as performance. You listen carefully. Is that line generic, or is it meant for someone specific? Maybe you, maybe everyone. The ambiguity is part of the thrill. You're never entirely sure, and that keeps you listening. Second gentle joke, because we're drifting close to sincerity. This is the ancient equivalent of posting a quote online and hoping one person understands it's about them. Women, especially respectable ones, must be even more cautious. Writing too freely risks misinterpretation, or worse, accusation. Desire has to be expressed indirectly, through compliments about character, virtue, wit. Emotional intelligence becomes survival skill. Men enjoy more latitude, but even they must avoid appearing foolish or uncontrolled. Passion is admired in poetry, not always in people. There's an undercurrent of performance in all this. You're not just expressing feeling, you're crafting an image of yourself as worthy of affection. Clever, measured, attentive. Roman seduction is less about fireworks and more about consistency, showing up in the same tone, again and again. As evening settles, you reread a line that was meant for you, or at least you believe it was. The lamplight flickers, the city quiets, your mind replays words the way it once replayed glances. Something has shifted. This isn't accidental anymore, it's intentional, but still fragile. You understand now why Romans trusted words so deeply. In a society ruled by law and reputation, language was the safest place to experiment with feeling. You could want someone on a tablet long before you were allowed to want them in real life. And as you set the stylus down, letting the wax cool, you feel that familiar tension return, the space between what you're allowed to say and what you actually feel. Rome lives there, so does longing. You feel the walls close in a little here. Not physically, Rome is still wide, loud and busy, but socially. Remember the letters, the poems, the careful signals? This is where the rules become visible again, especially if you're a woman. Romance doesn't disappear, but it's fenced in tightly, monitored by custom, rumour and expectation. You step outside knowing that how you move matters, how long you stay, who walks beside you. One mainstream historical fact sets the tone. In Roman society, a respectable woman's virtue was inseparable from her public reputation. It wasn't enough to be faithful. You had to appear faithful at all times. Perception mattered as much as reality. You learn quickly which spaces are safe. Family homes, religious festivals, public events where many eyes dilute individual scrutiny. Lingering alone with someone, even fully clothed, even in daylight, can be enough to spark gossip. And gossip here is not idle. It travels faster than truth and sticks longer than facts. Your clothing becomes part of the performance. Modesty signals respectability. Simplicity suggests moral seriousness. You're not dressing for comfort or self-expression. You're dressing to avoid attention. Ironically, the less attention you draw, the more approval you earn. There's a quirky historical detail that reveals just how symbolic this all is. Married Roman women wore a hairstyle called the tutulus, an elaborate arrangement that publicly marked their status. Hair wasn't just hair, it was information. Imagine your relationship status announced by your head before you even speak. Historians still argue how strictly these ideals were followed across different classes and regions, but in elite circles the pressure is unmistakable. You feel watched even when no one is visibly looking. Internal surveillance is the most effective kind. Your voice lowers naturally in public. You laugh, but softly. You choose words that are polite, never provocative. Compliments you give are about character, not appearance. You're not suppressing desire exactly. You're rerouting it into acceptable channels. Rome rewards restraint with safety. Men experience boundaries too, but they're wider, more forgiving. A man can flirt openly and still be respected. A woman doing the same risks being labelled reckless. The double standard doesn't pretend to be fair. It pretends to be natural. Here's a light joke before the mood tightens further. Imagine living in a world where smiling too enthusiastically could be considered a personality flaw. Congratulations, you're nailing Roman respectability. Even within marriage, expectations remain rigid. A wife's loyalty is assumed but constantly evaluated. You manage the household, raise children, honour the family name. Emotional fulfillment is a bonus, not a requirement. If affection exists, it's expressed through duty, keeping things running smoothly, preserving harmony. There's a fringe belief tucked into Roman moral writing that women were naturally more prone to emotional excess and needed structure to remain virtuous. This idea justified restrictions while sounding scientific. It's comforting for the system, less so for you. And yet, women find ways to exert influence. Subtle ones, managing social connections, guiding family decisions quietly, choosing silence at the right moment. Power doesn't vanish, it adapts. Romance too adapts. It hides in routine gestures, shared looks across crowded rooms, letters folded carefully and burned after reading. As night approaches, the city grows quieter, and the pressure eases slightly. Indoors, with trusted people, you can breathe. You reflect on how much energy goes into simply maintaining the image of propriety. Loving openly would be easier, but Rome doesn't allow easy. You sense now how unequal the emotional labour is. Desire costs women more. A mistake costs them everything. That knowledge shapes every interaction, every glance held or broken deliberately. And still, hearts beat, even behind walls. Even under rules, the boundaries don't erase feeling. They compress it, making it denser, heavier, more charged. As you settle into rest, you understand something deeply Roman. Love is allowed here, but only if it behaves. only if it stays quiet, only if it never forgets who's watching. You've probably noticed the imbalance by now. It's been humming in the background since the first arranged marriage, since the first cautious letter. Here, it steps fully into the light. Roman society talks about virtue endlessly, but it doesn't distribute it evenly. Remember those tight boundaries placed on women. Watch how loosely the same rules fit men. You walk through the city with a different set of assumptions attached to you now, depending on who you are. One mainstream historical fact frames everything. Roman law and custom expected strict sexual fidelity from wives, while granting husbands broad sexual freedom, as long as that freedom didn't threaten another man's household. Morality here is less about behavior and more about ownership. If you're a man, your honor isn't damaged by desire itself. Affairs with slaves, prostitutes, or courtesans are socially tolerated. In some circles, they're barely worth mentioning. You're not expected to be celibate or even particularly discreet. You're expected to be in control. The line isn't drawn at faithfulness. It's drawn at embarrassment. If you're a woman, the line is drawn everywhere. You feel it in conversations. A man's infidelity is shrugged off as appetite. A woman's imagined infidelity, imagined, is treated as catastrophe. Her loyalty is tied to family purity, inheritance, legitimacy. One rumor can ripple outward, staining fathers, brothers, children yet unborn. There's a fringe historical detail that reveals just how normalized this imbalance was. Roman writers debated whether men even could commit adultery in the same way women could. Some argued that adultery only applied when another man's legal rights were violated. Desire itself wasn't the issue, property was. Historians still argue how widely accepted this mindset was among ordinary Romans, but legal texts and elite literature make the pattern hard to ignore. Standing here, you don't need a scroll to feel it. You feel it in the way people react, in what's forgiven, in what's punished. Mistresses exist in a strange social limbo. They're acknowledged, sometimes even long-term. A man might support a mistress openly, as long as she doesn't challenge the status of his wife. The wife, meanwhile, is expected to endure this with dignity. Emotional discomfort is not considered a valid complaint. Here's a gentle joke to keep things from getting too heavy. Imagine being told, very seriously, that your partner's affair is fine as long as it doesn't inconvenience anyone important. Romance, but make it bureaucratic. Men talk about love differently too. They're encouraged to pursue passion but not be ruled by it. Emotional attachment to a mistress is frowned upon, not because it's unfaithful, but because it suggests weakness. Control is the virtue being measured, not devotion. Women, on the other hand, are expected to internalize restraint so completely that temptation itself becomes suspicious. You learn to monitor your own thoughts, not just your actions. That kind of pressure sinks deep. It shapes personality. It teaches caution where spontaneity might otherwise grow. Yet even within this imbalance, emotional complexity thrives. Some marriages are genuinely affectionate. Some husbands are loyal by choice, not obligation. Some wives form quiet understandings, focusing on stability over passion. Rome doesn't forbid love, it just doesn't prioritize fairness. There's another quirky tidbit tucked into satire and letters. Roman men sometimes complained that their wives were too virtuous, too distant, too emotionally reserved. It's an irony almost painful in hindsight. When a system punishes openness, it eventually complains about the lack of warmth. As evening settles, you watch couples pass in the street. Some walk close, some don't. You realize how much of Roman romance happens in silence, agreements unspoken, boundaries understood without explanation. You think back to the poetry, the letters, the careful flirting. Those were spaces where equality briefly existed, where two minds could meet without legal weight pressing down. Here, in daily life, the imbalance reasserts itself. Still, people adapt. They always do. Desire finds cracks. Affection negotiates. Humans are remarkably good at carving personal meaning out of unfair systems. As you lie down to rest, you feel both the weight and the absurdity of it all. Rules stacked unevenly, enforced selectively, justified confidently. And yet, hearts keep beating at the same rate. Roman dating isn't just about who you love. It's about who's allowed to love freely, and who has to love carefully. By now, you've probably noticed the unspoken workaround. When rules become too tight, societies invent side doors. Rome is no different. Remember those double standards that tolerated male freedom? This is where it leads you, into a world that's officially acknowledged, quietly regulated, and morally compartmentalized. You walk down a street where lamps glow a little warmer than usual. Painted symbols mark doorways. You don't have to ask what this place is. One mainstream historical fact grounds you immediately. Prostitution in ancient Rome was legal, taxed, and openly practiced. It wasn't hidden in shadows. It was woven into the city's economy and social structure. This doesn't mean it was glamorous. It means it was normalized. You notice how casually people pass by. No scandalized gasps, no dramatic pauses. Everyone knows what happens here, and everyone knows how to mentally separate it from real life. Respectable wives aren't threatened by prostitutes because the system insists they occupy entirely different categories. Love and sex in Rome are often treated as separate activities. There's a strange honesty to it. Hypocritical, yes, but not secretive. Courtesans occupy a different space altogether. Unlike prostitutes, courtesans are educated, witty, socially adept. They attend dinners, they hold conversations. Some even influence politics indirectly through relationships. Desire here is wrapped in charm and intellect. It's still transactional, but it feels closer to romance. A quirky historical tidbit slips in. Some courtesans became famous enough to be written about by name. Their wit and beauty were admired openly, even while respectable women were expected to fade into the background. Rome had no trouble celebrating female allure, as long as it came from the right kind of woman. Historians still argue whether courtesans held genuine social power or merely borrowed it temporarily through male attention. Standing here, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between. Influence is real, but fragile. For men, visiting these spaces carries little social risk. It's understood as release, not betrayal. Emotional attachment, however, is discouraged. You're supposed to leave satisfied, not changed. If feelings follow you home, that's considered poor discipline. Women experience this world differently. Respectable women are excluded from it entirely, except as silent witnesses to its effects. Jealousy is not supposed to exist. If it does, it's meant to be swallowed quietly. Roman culture offers no language for wives' emotional discomfort here. Here's a light joke to soften the edge. Imagine being told, with complete seriousness, that your partner's emotional absence is fine as long as it comes with a receipt and a tax record. Even slaves exist within this system, often exploited and voiceless. Their lack of agency is stark. It's a reminder that Roman dating norms don't exist in a vacuum. They're built on hierarchies far deeper than romance. Power determines who gets choices and who doesn't. Despite all this structure, genuine connections sometimes form in unexpected places. A regular visit turns into conversation. Conversation turns into familiarity. Rome pretends this doesn't happen, but humans don't always cooperate with social design. You feel the tension again, that recurring theme. Systems versus feelings, categories versus reality. Prostitutes are meant to be invisible emotionally. Courtesans are meant to be admired but never respected. Wives are meant to be respected but emotionally restrained. Everyone is boxed in, just differently. As night deepens, the city grows quieter. Lamps flicker, voices soften. You realize how carefully Rome has arranged its moral architecture, how it allows desire to exist without threatening inheritance, status, or order. And yet, cracks show everywhere. You return home aware that this entire parallel world exists alongside domestic life, rarely acknowledged directly, but always present. It explains a lot. The emotional distance in marriages, the quiet endurance, the unspoken compromises. Roman dating, if it can be called that, isn't about finding one person to fulfill everything. It's about distributing needs across acceptable channels. Stability here is preserved not by denying desire, but by redirecting it. As you settle into rest, you sense the cost of that arrangement. Desire fragmented, affection rationed. Love asked to stay in its assigned lane. Rome functions smoothly this way. People survive this way. But whether they're fulfilled is another question entirely. One Rome never bothers to ask out loud. You start to understand that in Rome, love doesn't usually collapse with a dramatic crash. It unravels in public, slowly, through whispers. Remember how reputation controlled everything? This is where it sharpens into a weapon. Jealousy here isn't just emotional, it's social, performative, and sometimes irreversible. You walk through familiar streets and sense it immediately. Conversations pause as you pass. A glance lingers too long. One mainstream historical fact frames this uneasy feeling. Roman society relied heavily on public opinion, satire, and rumour to enforce social norms. There is no privacy buffer. What people think about you matters almost as much as what you actually do. Jealousy thrives in this environment because comparison is constant. Who was seen with whom? Who laughed too freely? Who arrived late from the baths? No one needs proof. Suspicion alone can shift how you're treated. Rome doesn't require evidence. It requires consensus. For men, jealousy often plays out as wounded pride. For women, it's existential threat. A man jealous of his wife may confront her, restrict her movements, or appeal to family authority. A woman jealous of her husband has very few socially acceptable outlets. Public complaint makes her look bitter. Silence makes her invisible. There's a sharp, uncomfortable detail in Roman law. Accusations of adultery could carry severe consequences for women, even when unproven. Reputation alone could be enough to damage a life permanently. Historians still argue how frequently these laws were enforced in practice, but the fear of them was always present. Fear does half the work of control. Gossip moves efficiently. It travels through bathhouses, markets, dinner parties. It's repeated casually, almost playfully. But each repetition sharpens it. By the time it reaches its target, it's unrecognizable from the original moment that sparked it. Here's a light joke to keep us afloat. Imagine a group chat that includes your neighbors, distant relatives, and complete strangers, and none of them mute notifications. Welcome to Rome. Satire adds another layer. Poets and writers publicly mock behavior, disguising names but not details. If you recognize yourself in a poem recited at a dinner party, you're already too late. Laughter seals the verdict. Social punishment doesn't need courts. There's a quirky historical tidbit that fits perfectly here. Romans sometimes carved insults and accusations into walls. Graffiti wasn't just flirting, it was social commentary. Your love life could become part of the city's permanent decoration. Imagine your worst moment etched into stone and left for centuries. Jealousy fuels all this. It's not just personal pain, it's fear of exposure. Fear that your private feelings will be reinterpreted publicly. You learn to manage appearances carefully. Even innocent actions are reconsidered through the lens of how they might look if repeated by someone else. Yet jealousy also proves something important. People care deeply, even when the system discourages emotional investment. Love may be fragmented, regulated, redirected, but it's still intense enough to hurt. As evening falls, you sense the weight of eyes again. You lower your voice, you shorten conversations, you choose routes that minimize encounters. This isn't paranoia, it's adaptation. You think back to the letters, the poetry, the careful flirting. Those were controlled risks. Gossip is not. Gossip is chaos dressed as entertainment. It punishes without warning and forgives without explanation. And still, people talk. They always do. Silence doesn't stop rumor. It just changes its shape. Rome thrives on shared stories, even cruel ones. As you lie down to rest, you feel the emotional fatigue settle in. Loving carefully takes energy. Being watched takes energy. Managing jealousy, yours and others, takes energy. Roman dating doesn't just test affection, it tests endurance. How long can you care without being seen? How deeply can you feel without being heard? In a city built on visibility, love's greatest challenge isn't finding someone, it's surviving the attention once you do. You've probably noticed by now that desire in Rome is never quite free. Rules, gossip, contracts, they all shape it. But underneath it all, people still try to improve their odds. That's where advice, superstition, and love hacks enter the scene. Some are practical, some are bizarre, and all of them reveal how deeply Romans cared about getting it right. You sit in a quiet room, holding an amulet between your fingers. One mainstream historical fact sets the stage. Romans often used charms, spells, and rituals to influence love, marriage, and fertility. They carried phallic amulets, wrote love spells on tablets, and consulted oracles, all hoping to tilt fortune in their favour. Romance is both art and gamble here, heavily weighted toward magic. You glance at a collection of herbs on a shelf. Some are meant to enhance attraction, some are to ensure fidelity. Some, according to fringe sources, are intended to stir passion in ways modern science would never recommend, like placing roses under your pillow while reciting your desired partner's name 3 times. Historians still argue how effective these methods really were, but plenty of Romans believed strongly enough to try them. The practical advice is almost amusing. Women are told to cultivate modesty, to maintain cleanliness, to display small kindnesses. Men are counselled to act confident, to appear witty, and, here's the kicker, never to appear desperate. One misstep could render all your other efforts worthless. The stakes are social survival and, occasionally, marital happiness. Poets again play a role. Lines of verse serve as coded instructions, teaching men and women how to signal interest subtly, how to respond to advances, even how to gauge compatibility without breaking decorum. Some of these lines are romantic. Some are slyly strategic. You can almost hear a mentor whispering from the past. Notice the glance, reply with a smile, leave them wanting more. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. Some Romans carried miniature phallic figurines or carved charms into household doorways to promote love and protection. Imagine checking your keychain before stepping into the forum. It's kind of the ancient equivalent of swiping right with divine assistance. Superstitions blend with medicine too. Certain foods, wines, or potions were believed to influence desire or fertility. Physicians advised moderation or prescribed odd remedies. Historians still argue whether these recommendations were based more on tradition than science, but the fact that people tried them says everything about the intensity of desire in Roman culture. You start to notice patterns, rituals, charms, letters, poetry. They're all attempts to translate love into action, to control it within the otherwise uncontrollable Roman social world. It's a strange blend of devotion, calculation, and hope. Another light joke drifts through your mind. Imagine trying to text your crush while simultaneously consulting a fortune teller and juggling 3 herbs. It's basically what a Roman would do, just with wax tablets and incense smoke. And yet, these quirks make the experience deeply human. Desire is universal. Frustration is universal. The mix of superstition, careful observation, and personal initiative is just another way people have always tried to survive the emotional risks of connection. As night deepens, you reflect on all the precautions, charms, and advice. Love here is a careful game, strategic, playful, superstitious, but never emotionless. You feel the tension, the excitement, the hope, all compressed into daily life, rituals and stolen moments. Roman dating is messy, structured, and sometimes absurd, but it's also profoundly alive. Even in a society obsessed with rules, people find ways to want, to try, and to fail beautifully. The seasons change, and with them, the rhythms of Roman social life, and the subtle choreography of courtship. You feel it in the air. Warmer months bring festivals, colder months bring tighter gatherings, and every shift offers new opportunities or new constraints. Remember all the rules, letters, poetry, and charms? They now collide with the natural cycles of the city, shaping when and how people meet, notice, and respond to one another. You wander through the forum early in the morning, smelling the mixture of bread, oil, and river mist. One mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. Romans often timed celebrations, religious festivals, and public games to coincide with seasonal events, which were in turn prime opportunities for socializing and, occasionally, courtship. People knew that a festival was not just entertainment, it was an audition stage for connection. You notice how the public spaces feel different depending on the time of year. During Saturnalia, social hierarchies loosen just enough that a glance or a joke carries more weight than usual. During quieter months, small gestures, like leaving a note in a servant's hands or offering a piece of fruit, require more ingenuity. Desire adapts to circumstance. That is a timeless truth. a quirky historical tidbit emerges. During some festivals, men and women could exchange gifts or lightly tease one another in ways that were normally forbidden. Masks and costumes provided cover, allowing playful signals to be sent without social repercussion. It's like a sanctioned loophole in an otherwise rigid system. Historians still debate how widespread this freedom actually was, but the evidence is suggestive. You feel the tension as you navigate these public gatherings. Every movement is evaluated, every smile catalogued. The stakes aren't just romantic, they're social. A misstep can echo in ways that affect family, status, and even potential marriage alliances. This creates a careful balance. Show interest, but not too much. Show restraint, but not too little. Men and women have different sets of tools at their disposal. For men, the approach is often straightforward. Proximity, humour, and carefully chosen compliments. For women, the game is subtler, relying on poise, attentiveness, and indirect signals that indicate interest without violating decorum. Subtlety becomes a form of power. You take note of small cultural cues, the way a man offers his seat, the tilt of a head, the careful timing of laughter. The Romans might have relied on words, letters, and poetry to navigate desire, but they also communicated through body language, ritual, and observation. Emotion is both constrained and amplified by circumstance. Here's a gentle joke for this section. Imagine trying to flirt while wearing layers of heavy wool in winter, or sweating through linen in summer. It's romance with a side of climate control. Even in the most calculated interactions, genuine curiosity and affection peek through. Someone laughs at the right moment. Someone listens attentively. Someone notices the small details. These moments, fleeting and quiet, are the sparks that navigate the rigid framework of Roman expectation. By evening, the city softens. Torches flicker, streets empty, and the scent of cooking fires drifts into the night. Desire persists quietly beneath it all, following its own rhythm, guided by festivals, seasons, and subtle social cues. In Rome, love is patient, adaptive, and highly observant. It knows when to step forward and when to hide, and it often thrives in the spaces between rules. You feel the delicate tension, the interplay of structure and longing, more acutely than ever. You start noticing patterns now, subtle ones that stretch across years, families, and neighborhoods. Roman dating isn't random. It's a network of observation, expectation, and timing. Desire follows schedules, social cues, and seasonal rhythms. Remember those festivals, letters, and whispered glances? They're all part of a carefully orchestrated dance that teaches patience, discretion, and subtlety. You walk along a quieter street at dusk. The city hums softly around you. One mainstream historical fact guides your understanding. Arranged marriages and family alliances were often coordinated years in advance, with prospective couples sometimes introduced as children. This long-game approach means that attraction and familiarity develop slowly, through observation, shared experience, and social proximity, rather than instant passion. You recall the wax tablets, poems, and letters that circulated in previous sections. These tools allow people to test interest discreetly. A compliment written subtly, a line of poetry recited at the right gathering, or even small gestures like a gift of fruit can signal attention without endangering reputation. Social maneuvering is as much an art as it is a necessity. There's a quirky historical tidbit. Some Romans practiced love divination, observing birds, examining dreams, or interpreting the flight patterns of insects to gauge whether a romantic pursuit would succeed. Historians still debate how seriously ordinary people relied on these methods, but the persistence of such practices suggests they were at least a comforting ritual. You can't help but smile at the thought of someone scrutinizing a beetle for its romantic advice. The system is paradoxical. Desire is tightly regulated, yet human ingenuity always finds a way. Courtesans, for instance, occupy a space where affection, intellect, and influence converge. Men and women engage differently here. One seeks wit and charm, the other cultivates restraint and allure. Rules exist, but they are bent, interpreted, and sometimes ignored in private moments. Jealousy, gossip, and reputation remain constant companions. You sense them in the way glances are held, conversations are monitored, and gestures are calculated. You've learned to read between the lines, A smile too broad, a laugh too loud, or a presence too noticeable can be dangerous. Emotional life is compressed but concentrated, making each interaction more meaningful and charged. Here's a gentle joke. Imagine trying to navigate love while your entire city functions as a live social commentary. Every corner a potential stage, every passerby a critic. That's Rome in microcosm. You also notice the resilience of human longing. Letters are preserved, secret gifts delivered, and poetry whispered in hidden spaces. Even in a system designed to control desire, humans continue to hope, experiment, and pursue connection. The paradox is beautiful. The more rules exist, the more creative people become in expressing emotion. As night falls, lamps flicker along the streets, shadows dance on stone walls, and the city exhales. The patterns, the signals, the careful observances, they are all part of the rhythm of Roman love. You feel the tension of social expectation, yes, but also the quiet triumph of ingenuity, curiosity, and affection. Love in Rome is a strategic art, and despite all the rules, you see it flourish, sometimes tenderly, sometimes absurdly, but always persistently. The city is quiet now. Lamps gutter softly against the stone streets. You feel the weight of all the rules, contracts, and social expectations that have guided romance through your day, and, in a sense, through your entire life. Remember the letters, the charms, the poetry, the carefully managed glances? All of it converges here, in the stillness of night, where emotion meets reflection. You walk slowly, hearing only your own footsteps and the distant murmur of the Tiber. One mainstream historical fact reminds you why this matters. Romans often measured the success of love not by passion alone, but by the endurance of relationships across time, duty, and social expectation. Affection was a delicate negotiation between heart and society. Success was stability, companionship, subtle joy. Even in the silence, you notice human ingenuity persists. Courtesans continue their discreet influence. Married couples exchange small gestures. Letters continue to circulate. Charms rest quietly in pockets or beneath pillows. Desire is never entirely absent. It thrives in the cracks between rules, in the spaces carved out by careful observation, wit, and subtlety. A quirky historical tidbit surfaces. Some Romans believed that writing a loved one's name on a piece of lead and placing it in a river could influence fate. Whether this worked is anyone's guess. Historians still argue if these rituals were superstition, entertainment, or sincere attempts at controlling fortune, but you can't help but admire the creativity behind them. The rules, restrictions, and social structures have shaped how people love, flirt, and desire, but they have not defeated it. You recognize patterns of persistence, glances repeated across markets, letters revisited, songs hummed under breath, moments of intimacy tucked into ordinary routines. Even within strictures, humans improvise, adapt, and connect. You feel the tension of observation one last time, glances that could be misread, gestures that could be interpreted in multiple ways, feelings compressed into acceptable forms. Jealousy, gossip, reputation, all the invisible weights that have followed every step, linger in the background. Yet, against all this, the human heart continues to assert itself quietly, creatively, persistently. A gentle joke drifts through your mind. Imagine trying to practice love while living in a city that's part courtroom, part theatre, and part fortune-teller's den. You laugh softly because somehow it works. Somehow desire survives. You begin to settle, letting the city fade around you. Torches flicker, shadows stretch. The hum of the Tiber carries into your thoughts. The day's energy, the emotional labour, the careful calculation of glances and words, all of it dissolves into the calm night. You realise that, in Rome, love is not a single act or dramatic confession. It is endurance, subtlety, and presence over time. And as you close your eyes, you sense that this is the essence of Roman dating. Human hearts navigating rules, systems, and expectation with resilience, cleverness, and quiet hope. It's messy, strategic, sometimes absurd, but profoundly alive. The night deepens. You feel warmth from the fading glow of lamps and somewhere in the distance the river whispers its eternal song. Shadows stretch long across walls, softening the sharp lines of the city, the forum, the baths, and the streets where so many glances were stolen and carefully measured. You imagine embers glowing low in a hearth somewhere, their warmth spreading slowly, a gentle, golden reassurance that even in structured worlds, comfort exists. You let yourself breathe more slowly. The day's rituals, the letters, the poetry, the whispers of desire, all drift behind you, like smoke curling toward the ceiling. You can almost feel the pulse of countless Romans, wives, husbands, courtesans, poets, lying down in the soft hush of evening, hearts beating with subtle tension, anticipation, and quiet hope. Desire persists, even when unseen, even when carefully constrained. Your thoughts soften, the rules, the gossip, the careful dances of propriety, they all fade into rhythm. You carry only the gentle memories, a smile across a market, a well-timed word, a glance that lingers too long. You imagine these small sparks glowing in the night, illuminating private corners where hearts still reach for one another, where longing breathes quietly without demand. As you exhale, the city blurs into darkness and stillness. You feel the slow settling of warmth, the faint crackle of imagined embers, and the hush of everything gently falling asleep. Thoughts of desire, hope, and connection become soft, almost musical, dissolving into dreams that will carry the subtle pulse of human hearts into night. And now, as you drift, let these images linger. The flickering firelight, the quiet city, the resilience of love and hope across time. Let them hold you gently, like a soft cloak, reassuring and calm. Good night. Sleep deeply and dream softly.